Hey, it's Felipe. I wanted to talk a little bit about investing. Particularly, we all know we need to divest, but the big question is, where do you reinvest that money and how? That's what I'm going to cover today in this little short series. So, the first question, why divest? Well, we all know there's climate risk, there's the environmental reasons. We know we need to divest. Scientists have told us we have like 10 years to make serious, bold action. Otherwise, we're going to have the runaway effects of climate change, likely to totally change so much of the way life we know it in so many parts of the world. That's the first reason. But perhaps you're not convinced. And I think perhaps it's more important to think about the market when we think about our investing. So I think it's important to listen to some of the leading thinkers that say climate risk is underpriced in the market. Now, what does that mean? Basically, it's like when we set a price for the stock of ExxonMobil, we set that price, but we haven't taken into account the climate risk that that company has. And that's the case not just for fossil fuel companies, but for agriculture companies and real estate. Think about Miami and Boston and what we're going to be at like in 30, 50, 100 years. The valuation of those companies, the price that we set for those companies does not include the climate risk that we know is happening. We know the disruptions. We've seen the hurricanes. We've seen the wildfires. We're experiencing that in so many parts of the country today. But that is underpriced in the market. And many analysts, many experts in the markets will tell you that. I think there's also a socio-political risk that's not taken into account. We saw the pandemic. We see disease spread. There are other risks that we're not aware of. And that the market doesn't want to see those going forward as more significant than they have been in the past. For good reason. So much of our stuff is looking in the rearview mirror. But I think let's take another practical reason. We also know there's business cycles. We know that every 10 years, more or less, over the past 80 years, the stock market has taken a pretty big downturn. We saw a little bit of that in March. It's recovered, of course. But as I think about my money, as I think about where I'm putting it, one of the biggest factors I'm thinking about is when I was at IHS Sierra, this elite energy research and economic consulting firm that I was a part of for the first 2 years of my career. Our leading thinker, Larry Makovich, I remember he'd get up there on the bigger the stage with the leading oil and gas and electric power executives in the country, and he would talk about, are your assets, are you stress testing those under the downturns that we've seen consistently happen? Are you thinking about what you would do in a significant downturn? Have you really thought through that? And as I began to think through that myself, as I saw some of the leading analysts on Wall Street project that over the next 7 years, they believe equities as a whole class stocks will basically have a negative 1% return. As I started seeing some of that data, I started realizing, I'd rather my money do something that I feel is really good for the world if it's likely not to be growing at 10% a year. So that's one of the reasons I'm also divesting from the stock market. And the reason I'm talking about this is I've actually sold kind of more than half of my portfolio that was in mostly index funds, which was the so-called good thing to do, and even social responsible mutual funds, that was what most of my friends and thoughtful people had convinced me was the best way to do things. I now no longer believe that right now for myself, and that's why I've sold more than 80% of what I own in the S&P 500 index funds over the past little while. So what do you do when you divest? Now that we've divested, where do you put that money? Where does that go? So this is something I've wrestled with for a while. I started with slow money loans, just getting comfortable making direct investments in local farmers, local businesses. I was so grateful for the Slow Money North Carolina network that got me used to doing that, having that kind of conversation. And then more recently, I've been a part of a co-op accelerator, Start.coop, where I've seen some of the really talented entrepreneurs dreaming big about how they could grow a platform co-op made up of the drivers of Uber and Lyft and DoorDash, and how the data they have is so valuable for transit agencies and other companies. They can sell that and monetize that. And also the data that they can build together in this platform can help them optimize how to make a better living. So I'm so excited to invest in Driver's Seat Co-op. And I made some of those investments, but those are pretty high risk. Those startups are likely to fail. I know some other small companies I've invested in have struggled, and that's just a reality. So how do you reinvest in good, sustainable, future-oriented companies? Well, I'm super excited to tell you about Quechua Impact Fund. Quechua is founded by the gentleman Blake Jones, who founded Namaste Solar, one of the largest, most successful worker-owned co-ops called in Colorado. And he's also built the Clean Energy Credit Union, and now he's built Quechua Impact Fund. Part of what I like about it is 60% of it is in real estate. And this was something I was looking to diversify away from traditional equities, is how can I have some real estate, some land, some stuff that has some lasting power. 60% of this fund is in non-extractive relationships with solar companies, a couple breweries in Colorado. And so that's the big part of the fund. The other part of the fund is a diversified set of cooperatives and other kind of social, environmental companies that I'm gonna show you right here. So this is their portfolio at Quechua. And I want to just point out Equal Exchange. This is the coffee company I love. They really help small farmers. Organic Valley, it's where we buy a lot of our milk from, a lot of farmers there. SJF Ventures was founded by a guy named David Kirkpatrick. He went to church with him when I first moved to Durham. He's a really faithful guy who's built one of the most powerful, successful impact funds, Sustainable Job Fund, and then Namaste Solar's 21%. So you can see all these other investments, but what I like about this portfolio here is that it's diversified across a lot of companies that are very well established and that consistently pay 5, 7, 8% dividends. And the whole Quechua Impact Fund has upside. That's what I love about it. Between 5 and 8% is their target return to investors each year. So it's not just we're going to take your money and like a micro lending and give your money back. We're going to give your money with a real upside return to Quechua. And most importantly, just the relationships they've built. So the third point today. How do you actually invest in something like Quechua? And this is something I've wrestled with. We have some money, clearly, but the most of my money that I actually own is in retirement funds. It's been from, the tax deferred, 403B, 401k money that I've had, and the Roth IRAs that we put away a little bit when we've had extra in a given year. But how do you use that money? Because my Roth IRA is in a bank and I have basically just a very limited set of options. Maybe there's a social responsible mutual fund there with Praxis or Calvert, which I have some of those, but to me that hasn't gone far enough. And this is where what feels good and what has felt good. And most of this stuff hasn't felt good. But for me, for the first time last month, I put the biggest chunk of my money into Quechua Impact Fund because it feels like the right thing. The smartest thing of all the business work I've done this past 4 years, trying to help companies go solar. This is an interesting story. Part of what I like about Quechua is that it's not a publicly traded solar company, because I think the publicly traded companies have investor supremacy at the top. Investor concerns above all else. It's kind of like white supremacy. And I think over the next decade, I wonder what we might come to think of as investor supremacy as not balancing the other stakeholders, the workers, the environment, the community. We need different stakeholder groups to have real power on the boards of companies, allocating the surplus value that a company creates. And that's why I believe co-ops are such a much better version of that. And Quechua, to me, is a cooperatively structured fund that allocates things and also invests in cooperatives. So how do you do that? The main way I've done it, and this is just one approach, is using that retirement money. So I rolled over money to a self-directed IRA. So it's an IRA that you can invest in alternatives. And there's 10 or 15 of these different types of self-directed IRA providers. The one I want to talk about here is Alto IRA. The reason is it's super easy to do it online. And there's a ton of paperwork here. You have to convert your old Vanguard or Fidelity accounts. I got Fidelity to move money, but I just clicked here. They filled out the forms for me. I simply signed them. Then I had to answer a few phone calls back and forth, but I got my money from Fidelity and from Vanguard into Alto IRA. And then from Alto IRA, they wrote a check on my behalf to Quechua Impact Fund. So that's how I did it. That's how I recommend you do it. Or that's one way to recommend it. I'm going to try to have a few of these conversations. If you're interested in having more of this discussion, I'll be gathering some folks on December 4th. I also have a quick little form if you want to be told about just candid Q&A conversations with other people that are wrestling with similar things. How do we invest for a livable future? It's complicated. So much is up against us. But I believe by us choosing to take bold action, investing the time to actually get out of where the inertia of the whole financial advisory sector is, this is how we begin to bend the needle on justice, faith. For me, this is a question of Pope Francis and the economy of Francesco. How do we build the economy we most want? I think we need to take these kind of actions. And so I hope to record a few more videos just to share a little bit more about my portfolio. About half of my portfolio right now is in Quechua and other impact aligned things, and about half my portfolio is not, still in S&P 500 bought. And so I still have more work to do.